Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Room 42. I'm Liz Fraley from Single Sourcing Solutions. I'm your moderator. This is Janice Summers from TC Camp. She's our interviewer, and welcome to Mary Beth Shea, today's guest in Room 42. Mary Beth Shea teaches advanced composition at the University of Maryland. These courses include professional and technical writing, where she typically instructs scientists and engineers in science writing about the environment, and special sections under Design for Data Analysis for computer science students. She has also co-taught special courses on big data and visualization. Recently, she developed a gateway course for medical humanities with colleagues in history, languages and literatures, and philosophy. She also consults with scientists, particularly environmental science teams, about communicating their findings for policy. Today, Mary Beth is here to help us start answering the question, how humanities studies can help scientists communicate their findings. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, I feel more important than I am.
Thank you, Liz. You're very important, and we're very excited to be talking to you.
Absolutely.
So how did you get involved in environmental technical writing? It seems you have a special emphasis in that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that can happen with a great boom of failure, or the door clangs shut and you're not on the side that you want to be on. And it's related to science. Before molecular biology could rise up and give us genetic analysis, reorganizations on campus took place, and I was interrupted in my botany PhD. Botany disappeared, and they said, why don't you go over to the policy school? Your fellowship will transfer. You know, you like the environment and stuff. You know, you can do policy.
You like the environment and stuff.
Kind of. And then I didn't leave campus. I'm one of those people. So I'm a real terp story. And then it was the English department going, oh my God, we need someone to teach science writing who's not afraid of science. So that's kind of how it started, with environment being one of those areas that was percolating up in really central ways. This was before Kyoto Protocol, but I got to be part of the science tech team, communication team, who was developing that work for public audiences and then promulgating it. So yeah, accident and the clanging of a door shut.
I love that. The clanging of the door shut. Now what do you do? Drop back 10, punt, figure it out. So, yeah. So you did a recent study, or recent interdisciplinary work that I want to talk about. The way you phrased it was really great. It was the scientist, the humanist, all walk into this chicken coop. I'm rephrasing it wrong.
Yeah.
But tell us,
like a joke.
Yeah.
All right. So again, there's these sort of accidental opportunities, but most of us who have this connection to technical communication know roughly, or very specifically, we arise out of the post-war engineering training, and boom. Okay, sort of like a second land grant. We were going to do plowshares from implements of war. We would keep the implements of war going, but we need to help those engineers talk about their stuff. So the same thing happens with a lot of federal grants. Grafted onto the grant during the phases of applying is, and what is your science communication plan? And there was a new one. I would sometimes get grafted on, but there was a new one that said, get a science communicator early and have them be part of the design.
Oh, interesting.
Someone sort of put me on to check a box, and two of the other people on it said, we won't let this just be a check box thing. We want you to be part of the design of the experiment. So I got to become part of a human dimensions component of some pretty straight up, let's measure how much ammonia comes off of, can we say a bad word? Poultry litter, which is chicken shit plus food crumbs plus bedding plus aerialized chicken particles. Yeah, right. Big source of ammonia pollution. And for us in the Chesapeake Bay, lands on the water. But the human dimensions piece happened kind of by accident, but also the strong advocacy of 14-member team, 4 institutions with Maryland being a primary one, two scientists said, we are not going to let this just be check a box. Come and help us design this. So yeah, I got to help design
Cool.
how to assess a human component of how do we reduce ammonia. It was
Is
wonderful.
that trend growing now in communication? Or
Yes. However, it's worth noting that there was a huge chilling effect during the Trump 4 specific years, because a lot of this money came from USDA and a few other sort of allied places.
right.
But even before that, there started to be a need for, you will tell us what the economic implications are of your environmental research. And anytime you say economics, you are really talking about human dimensions.
Right.
So there's been a science communication piece for a while, and then this human dimensions piece, that's why I said the social scientists. So people would kind of invite an economist in. And then what I love is that my being brought in was to design something about how can we communicate for specific possible shifts in human behavior. Yeah.
Right. Because the goal is to, find a solution, communicate that solution. And the solution often involves the humans at the other end.
Oh, yeah. And at different nodes in a complex system. And we sometimes, we probably understand it from being in technical communication as opposed to, say, maybe, I don't know, entertainment communication.
Right.
Things can look like a technical problem, but technical problems are people problems.
Right. And people problems are multifaceted.
Absolutely.
Right. Because it does dip into the motivation, but you also have to communicate a high amount of technical information to these people in order to tap into those emotional aspects, right?
Right. And most of us, although the pandemic has sure shaken us all from our moorings about the role of rational information and decision making, and yet, despite a lot of other stuff going on, and that Aristotle was fully aware of about the power of emotion and trust in human decision making, both for individuals and in a polity, we still want I still want deeply rational based decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And that often means assembling people who go deep down into their silos, like the people who count basically nitrogen molecules as it shifts between nitrates and nitrites and sulfates and sulfites. Well, that's a different species, but it tracks with sulfur compounds on the air, water, and soil margins. It's really complicated. And they were in this group. And so were people who understand, well, we can feed chickens a little differently. We can feed chickens a little differently so their fecal output will be a little less methane emitting, because there's always that concern, but also can we get the nitrogen in their excrement to drop out into a precipitate on the floor and not have it go into the air. So those kinds of scientists are there. And then we have farmers. And then I would say that one thing I was able to do that technical communication has a deep, sustained, articulated commitment to the, sometimes we call it the embodied expertise of people who do things. Okay. So poultry farmers know how to raise chickens. They don't want them to die. They want them to be healthy enough. It's still a factory farm situation is harsh, but they have their incentives in the right place, and they don't always, in order to get the chickens to market, because we all eat them, they know stuff. And I think that in some ways, when we did our post-mortem, I had one of these really strict nitrogen scientists say to me, I hadn't really thought that I needed to know about some of the expertise that the farmers hold, and they hold kind of close to their vest. It's sort of embodied in their daily practice. They can walk into one of those poultry houses, and without even looking at a monitor, they can just sort of look up. It's like chicken foo. They know something isn't right. And then they start their exploration before they even say to you, oh, the nitrogen is off in this corner. They've got that embodied cognition and praxis expertise.
Right.
And teasing that out was
That they might
important.
not even know, right? That they don't necessarily articulate because they've been doing this some generationally, right?
Right.
So it becomes like part of who.
Yes, some generationally. And that's where at a big land grant school, at a big land grant school, they will even say to you, well, I would talk about that with my cooperative extension agent. They want to know about, how I view that part of chicken rearing. But they didn't think that the scientists wanted to know. And actually, the scientists didn't know how much they wanted to know
Right.
about this. We also did something really interesting that we had to get special permission for. We decided to, with the permission of farmers, cite some very complex data, real-time data sensing material, sensors on their poultry farms. So we're measuring it in real time. And it took trust on the part of scientists to say, oh, yeah, we're going to accept data that comes from a citizen, from a poultry farmer, and we're going to trust that data. And I said, well, we can also meta tag it. We can say these parts of the data set came from these 2 poultry farms. But they also reached the point where they were thinking, I could trust having sensors be at a working poultry farm, as opposed to maybe setting, just doing a lab experiment where you are doing a lot of controlling of confounding variables. So it was really interesting. And I would also say it's huge to have poultry farmers have trusted us to measure a pollutant coming off of their particular farm. Right?
Yeah, that takes a lot of trust to get candid. And how do you break through that barrier to get that relaxed nature, because you want all of your data that you're collecting and all the information to be accurate that you're documenting.
So it's pretty labor intensive. And one of the things about technical communication, however you're trained, is you find that you have to put on and quickly bring in knowledge and practices from a number of places. So ethnography from anthropology was really helpful, and there's no substitute. You need to go and visit poultry farmers. And I went to chicken dinners, mostly in Methodist church halls. And there's a fairly large Mennonite community on the Eastern Shore. So I ate some of the best food you can imagine. But I also had to show up, and I'll just sort of show these to you. One of the things we did involved visualization of aspects of poultry farming on the Eastern Shore and, getting close to the water.
Right.
We did a lot of this with these cards. So it was really visual, and I would hand out the cards and we would talk about them and do some sorting. And I guess what I want to say is there's, I know people make fun of it, and it's a line from, oh my God, early Saturday Night Live. It felt a little bit like Nice White Lady,
Okay.
Nice lady who grew up in Montana with relatives with a dairy. It really helped that I could say something about it, but you had to really dial back your professor hat. You could have your teacher hat on, but
right.
It was that.
But trying to meld in, to relate, that relatability, right? That's what you were able to tap into. And I think, isn't that one of the challenges and one of the special things I think that makes technical communicators so very interesting? Because they're interested in everything. And there's a reason for that, because you need to relate to so many different people at so many different levels, right?
Right. And one of the things I would be doing because there's a lot of driving, as Liz knows, there's a lot of driving, and there's a drive across a really highly elevated bridge. And I would be meditating on all the things that we teach, particularly students, or when we do professional training. Think about audience analysis.
Yes.
Know your audience.
Know your audience. Yes.
What's going to work for your audience, and that we can construct audiences and we can study them, but user-centered design or usability testing, focus groups, it's really important to spend time with the audiences. So yeah, the audience analysis skills, really helpful, completely helpful.
Yeah, getting in the trenches with them so that you have a deeper understanding. It really does affect how you communicate, how you message things when you understand from their perspective. I think part of it too is because human nature, like, you know, we're a user of a product or a service. We
Mhm.
have adaptabilities that we develop that we don't,
Mhm.
as end users, don't necessarily document or aren't even aware. You know, you talked about the embodied expertise. Is that like, you know, as you're an expert in something because you've been journeyed into it? So
Yeah, and
you
there's a notion of doing as opposed to maybe thinking.
uh-huh.
Some of it came, let's see, Bev Sauer is a technical communicator who works on it a great deal. She had some amazing articles in the 90s where they would talk to miners in South Africa about safety. And
Mhm.
people would sort of assume, well, there's some language barriers but she would be in these rooms and the miners would be doing this. In a room, not a mine, but talking about safety, and they would be pantomiming because as they were being asked about mining safety, what did the miners do? Mentally, they were in the mine and they were doing calculations like, well, when you look up above you and you see like a subtle shift in moisture or there's a hairline fracture there that wasn't there the other day. Do you know what I'm saying? It was
Right.
so physical. And the pantomiming is what made her go look up. I think Merleau-Ponty is one of the first people in a very philosophical way talked about embodied cognition. Even people don't always like him, but I appreciate him. Malcolm Gladwell, when he did his book about, do something 10,000 times. And he had notes on it like, do something 10,000 times really well with a mentor and a master around you. That kind of gets at some of the embodied cognition, like athletes. What do they know? Oh my God, they know stuff in their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
It also meant we shifted our language too. I became kind of one of those translator people. And it's a little bit like, what definition shall we use for our audience? And how will we cross train one another so we know we're talking about the same thing? So there's this one technique that's really neat that involves planting trees near and downwind and upwind. You do it in different ways because of the seasonal changes. You can capture a lot of airborne nitrogen by sticking trees up. Trees that can withstand high nitrogen, the nitrogen will fall to the ground. And nitrogen is a major input for plants.
Yeah.
So we would do these things called VEB, vegetated emissions buffers, and farmers have to know they work because they give up some cropland, right? To put what looks to be non-functional plants. It's not corn and it's not soybeans. And trust me, those poultry farmers are doing other things too. And I remember turning to one of the scientists and going, well, let's just stop calling them VEBs. Let's call them hedgerows and shelter belts.
Yes. Shelter belts, yes. Things that make sense from a farmer's perspective. Like they all know shelter belts. You go anywhere in the Midwest and you can tell they know what shelter belts are, right?
Exactly. Yes. And there's this amazing tradition, yes. And we talk about embodied cognition. Sometimes it's called heritage farming, and it's also part of when we do low impact farming or restorative agriculture or getting certified for organic stuff. You find that you go back into the history of farming, but you also find that there's living embodied knowledge. That sort of hedgerow thing, think about in England, the aerial shots of England, and a lot of our culture was UK transplant, oh my God, to much more arid area. But look at how we shifted into shelter belts. And we have to do windbreaks in much bigger ways than most Brits do. I think the Scottish people would tell you they have to do some shelter belts for wind. But to even just say that and having one nice scientist sort of look at me dumbfounded and go, but VEB means vegetated emissions buffer.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And I go,
not understand that.
I get it. Oh my gosh.
We'll publish in the science and tech journals about VEBs and it'll be one of our keywords. But when we're out talking, and then of course, the cooperative extension agents are the masters and the mistresses of this. We're going to say shelter belt. We're going to say hedgerow.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that competition between like over communicating things versus simplifying things, like, right.
Specialized language, and in respect to the disciplines, there's a reason we have specialized languages, you know. It helps get at, you know, like the difference between nitrite and nitrate, even though policymakers will sometimes say NOx, N-O-X, X meaning,
Right.
I don't care if it's a nitrate.
Either one, right? Nitrate or nitrite, I don't care. Right.
The nitrogen that's reactive in the environment that can cause air pollution and water pollution, we care. So it's called NOx.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that can be how a policymaker would talk about nitrogen speciation in an aqueous to soil perimeter. But we need both. And we also need, well, the chicken shit leaches off into the water, and you're going to get an algal bloom by August if you're not lucky, right? We're all sort of
right.
Same thing.
And all three are the same message, but to the different, they're specialized to the different audiences, right? Spoken in a language that's more comfortable for them.
Right. And I think most TC people would be laughing and smiling about this, because doing a lot of terms translation just becomes an automatic skill, and to help people see and move, and also comfort people when the degree of specificity isn't needed at that moment.
Right.
You know, but also to acknowledge that the degree of specificity matters. And trust me, I think there were 32 scientific publications that came out of this and some allied work. No one wrote NOx or SOx or hedgerow. They wrote VEB, and they were able to talk about nitrate accumulation and nitrite accumulation and ambient ammonia as is necessary, right?
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of like saying there's a time and a place and an occasion, again, taking us back to so many of the tools of TC, especially since I was trained in TC at Maryland, and Liz will know about this. We're very much a sort of modern rhetoric place, old rhetoric for modern students, like stasis theory and logos, pathos, ethos. So to think about the idea of kairos, the occasion, you know, so the words are going to be right for the occasion, and we can be more specific and we can be more general about things. It also meant that the farmers felt more as if they were participating, and it's risky for them. There's even, you know, some political differences, and talk about polarization, you know. And they're afraid of being regulated. They're deeply afraid of being regulated. And scientists are always a little surprised by that, really. And I would say to the scientists, oh my God, they're letting us put a monitor right by their farm that's showing how much ammonia is coming off of their chicken production. And the scientists go, yeah, I'm really glad we trust each other. And I go, yeah, but think about this. The more science develops models where we can monitor specificity, we ratchet down appropriately and rationally on either regulation or broader instruments, like maybe regionalized cap and trade for nitrogen, which is a regulatory activity upon a business activity. And poultry farming is complicated, but I would say about 3/4 of Eastern Shore poultry farmers right now, their average age is about 67, and they are in deeply contractual relationships with the big poultry companies that you can recognize from labels at the supermarket. They are sole proprietors, and they worry, and their margins are their margins, and thought of more regulation is hard on them. And at the same time, they experience something in their community. Again, there's TC also, TC is always making you microscope in to things, but also pulling out contextually. They live in communities and are often related by family ties and marriages and community ties, and church is huge there, to people who farm the bay for oysters and crabs.
Right.
So they know that nitrogen management is really important. They
Right.
don't want their neighbors to not be able to survive the farming of the bay.
Right.
So it's interesting to sort of see that they might want to do something to sustain some communal activity,
Mhm.
especially in small towns where the margins are kind of scary. Yeah, that's a huge motivator for them to, if they can, shift some of that nitrogen out of the air and away from the soil water margin. We're trying to keep it out of the water in the bay. In
Mhm.
the East Coast, we're trying to keep it out of the water. And this is this exports to people who live in the largest watershed in the country, which would be the Mississippi, because all that ag through the Midwest,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
to get
Oh,
down
yeah.
to Louisiana,
All
and,
ends up into the
you know,
Mississippi. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of it is nitrogen. So yeah, so some of this thinking applies. And yeah, I'm talking about nitrogen. Ask me what you want to ask me, but clearly I became, you know, a nitrogen communicator.
Well, that's one of the interesting things too that happens with people who enter into tech comm is oftentimes in the discipline that you're in, you become quite an expert on a lot of aspects of it, and it becomes part of you because you have to be so deep into each side. And you had a benefit of a very scientific background before you entered into technical communication, right?
Yeah.
So that, it was already kind of in your DNA.
Again, it's one of those happy accidents.
Mhm.
And yet, as someone who teaches, I would say the journalism model can be really helpful for our students and also training. You know, TC people, there's a big teaching component to your life, whatever you're doing.
Right.
Healthcare people have a big teaching component to their life. Sometimes we just need to be reminded. And also we need to elevate that as a really important professional skill and not just that's over there in K to 16. But there are ways to, within a community, and a lot of what we do in life now is team-based, teams
Mhm.
within an institution, or we have these allegiances across institutions. We need to know enough about something. We
Mhm.
need to know when to defer to our colleagues who really are nitrogen experts. It's a little bit like journalism. The best
Yeah.
journalists know how to go in and lay it all out because there's a story in
Investigators.
there. There's
Yeah.
always a story too. And here, you know, nitrogen is a big character in the story.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that investigative part, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, of the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's what makes technical communication so interesting and so challenging just to nail down, because it's so many aspects of so many different things. Right.
Right. And then we ended up doing the visualization piece, which was really, really important because one of our main audiences was to share a lot of knowledge
Right.
with poultry farmers.
Right.
Okay. And there's a lot of complexity. So each of these little cards, and there were 25 cards, would capture some aspect of managing nitrogen, either direct actions or, how about this? And technical communicators are good at this, and scientists tend not to be because it's not part of their training. If we're thinking about human behavior, we have to think about subjectivity and values about how we will manage our nitrogen, because there are values at play and trade-offs when something is not command and control regulated or demanded or counted. So we're trying to shift behavior in each farmer, and that usually means their values. So there was a card in one set that a scientist who's actually a friend of mine, she chucked it out of the deck and we didn't use it one day, and I'm looking for it. And she goes, Mary Beth, you had something in there about managing ammonia as an expression of spiritual values. And I went, of course I did. Why do you think I've been spending time with chicken farmers in Methodist church halls? They may manage a farm in part because of their role in co-creation
Right.
God, and a specific kind of stewardship that's related to visions of Eden and Adam and Eve, and that God gives it for use, but not trashing. And she went, oh my God, I'm sorry. And I went, we'll just put it in the next card set. But it was really interesting to recognize, I probably needed to alert some scientists. We're going to do some subjectivity. We're going to just note that farmers may want to think about their deepest spiritual values. It would help shift them about decision making. And the thing is that you can do that without necessarily saying, hey, everybody, stand up and tell me your deepest held spiritual values. That doesn't really work. I promise you that doesn't really work. But I also thought that there was one farmer's wife who came up to me and said, can we plant beautiful flowers on one side of the veb, like away from where the highest nitrogen and particles are coming out of the poultry house exhaust fan? And I said, I think so. They'd have to withstand high nitrogen environments. And she goes, okay. And she goes, why are we talking about withstanding high nitrogen environments? And I said, well, I think you mean it to be, can an edge of this veb be a garden? And could you put in some annuals? And she goes, well, my kids will want to do pollinator friendly species. And she goes, but I just want geraniums and begonias on the edge so that I can look at them in the evening. I had never thought about an aesthetic value to any of this. So then we put in a little card about that. And to be honest with you, it doesn't help with a gigantic amount of nitrogen management. But if someone is sitting on the fence about how big they're going to plow, to put in their hedgerow, their technically designed hedgerow to capture nitrogen, if they do 2 more feet and put in a perimeter, and I went back to USDA and had a long talk, and oh my God, the specialized knowledge deep down in the silos. This horticulturist said, these are the 6 species. They're tropical species, and begonias were one. They like, they're high nitrogen feeders. They want nitrogen. They're available at yard stores. So we were able to have this list, and it became part of the subjective value about if you're sitting on the fence on something. And this is going to sound a little, I want to acknowledge the reality of it. The women and men who run these farms are very much partnered and also have division of labor, but those women know how to go in and pull out the ill chickens to take to a vet to find out what the disease is. They'll go in and do that too, of course. But they also have very stricter roles than I am used to. And the women didn't really want to be approached as farming decision makers. And I thought, but having a card about aesthetics that rose up from a woman going, can I put some flowers? Can I,
Right.
That was a way to look at the sort of unacknowledged and complex role of women as decision makers within this system. Yeah, it was humbling.
That is interesting, because they would be the more subtle influencers in the background, because even though they're not the decision makers, they're influencers in decisions.
Right. And then I'll tell you what other piece of information they were really interested in. I said, as we were getting ready to develop our training sessions, and here technical communicators know and will admit when they're making an argument with evidence. Scientists tend to say, here's my evidence. It's just really clear.
Right. Crystal clear. How could you not understand it? Like,
exactly.
Here's all the data.
Right. And I would say an argument for these families to stay with us longer and pay attention a little bit more is to talk to them about the relationship of ambient particulate matter and ammonia and particulate matter do interact, and they make something that's it doesn't last really long, but on hot days, it means it's worse for your lungs. It's the complexity of air pollution. Synergistic effects of chemicals that get together under hot conditions. It's more a problem for COPD, which is more the adult version of diminished lung function. But but also it can be associated with not only asthma attacks, but increasing the incidence of asthma in a population. Okay.
Mhm.
The women were incredibly interested in this, and several farmers were interested in it as a sort of OSHA thing for themselves and
Mhm.
maybe their workers, which are sometimes their teenage children. But it was the women in the groups who would come up to us afterwards and say, tell me more. I want to know more about the public health effects. So I want to know more about the health effects. So I recommended at the end that we boost and have a section. We brought in public health data. And one very nice scientist said, yeah, but we didn't do that data. I go, other wonderful people did. And
Mhm.
we can bring it in, and we can separate our research, your research about the ambient ammonia measured during these 3 years, et cetera. But remember, this builds an argument and it builds a contextual case.
Mhm.
So, and they know that. It's just that the publication standards for scientists are so disciplinary. There are times that you can't attend to that larger context. But this was a case where we had some differentiated communication products and we could. And I got
Mhm.
to be kind of in charge of that, which was really fun.
Interesting. So, because you're communicating out to the community, so you could pull things in, but the science that they were collecting for submission into the scientific community, that you didn't have to include the other data from the other.
I would help them talk about the significance of some of their findings. And
Mhm.
they could see that poultry farmers and Eastern Shore policymakers, including some environmentalists, were really interested in the fact that we were studying all this nitrogen. And
Mhm.
they could also see it wasn't just because we were trying to protect the water quality. It was also that the French have a saying about you have to knit the stitches as they present themselves in the making of a garment. And there's
Mhm.
you think you're going to go after nitrogen in the water, but that's not all you're going after. And that if you want people to reduce the nitrogen in the water, you might want to get them on board about reducing it from their farms because they live on their farms and they don't want to have increased risk to themselves or their children or grandchildren about asthma. Okay, so by any means necessary. However, we're going to lower that nitrogen and we can solve more than one problem at a time. We can look at a public health problem and an aesthetic problem,
Mhm.
and also
Yeah.
economic viability about chickens and about the recreation on the Eastern Shore. And how about oysters and crab, which
Right.
is delicious.
So sustaining environment for not just the chickens, right?
Yeah, for human flourishing,
Yes.
human flourishing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting how so much stems from one thing, right? You think you're working on one thing, and then so much, it's much more complex.
Right. Which again is why I'm sort of sorry that I did technical community. I feel like I have to apologize to everybody that I was doing technical communication with them on climate change when I was in my mid-20s back in the 80s, because I'm so much better now. And part of it is the syncretism of the different skills and doing it at a university where even if you don't want to, you are in a place of inquiry. And when I was going back over the different technical communicators who have been here, and Liz and Janice have heard a little bit of this, I've gone, oh my God, there's Bill Hart Davidson. Oh my God, there's Liz Carusi. Oh, and I actually quoted him in my dissertation, Sam Draga, about
Yes.
cruel pies, inhuman data. So I just think I am so grateful for the pedagogy piece at a big land grant institution that requires me to keep learning about my stuff. And yeah, we are such an eclectic place, right? TC.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
It's huge.
It's everywhere.
Yes.
The thing that struck me most recently in the conversation is you're talking about, Science Pub can't attend the larger audience, but like the training and public communication can't, right? It can reach those secondary audiences and in fact should.
Mhm. And I would say that's even more, the pandemic is a really interesting example. And I hope that we will keep some of this, all this open publishing. So you probably heard, well, we just had to put a preprint up and keep going. So this preprint idea made the scientists all nervous, but we had to go fast and find something. Okay. And science is built syncretically and pyramid-like and interdisciplinary. And it's always true. And the USDA is increasingly requiring that they will either pay for in the grant an open access that like every fifth publication that comes out of this grant, we will help you pay for open access because, scientists have to pony up a lot of money to make something open access. But this knowledge gets out there and people see it. And if you don't have a public communication piece, sometimes what happens is people will misinterpret it.
Yeah.
And also other people will willfully take it and do really unethical communication stuff with it. People in climate change have seen that for years, the cherry picking of one little data set. Or how about this technical knowledge from science? Well, we transformed our data to be able to use ice core plus temperature records plus whatever. They do have to arrange data, but they said transform. And then in a hearing, someone will go, look at this. I pulled up their paper. They transformed their data. That's unethical. They're just trying to fund their climate science gig. We have to understand that. And I do think that hardwiring opportunities and duties and bringing in technical communicators into science starts to create that public conversation where we can get ahead of some of it, but we also have to train our audiences to accept some of the science.
To accept, and I think that's the key thing, by having technical communicators involved early and that open access, technical communicators understand how it is to train people on technical information so that they can understand it, right? So that people can understand how science evolves, what science is, and fact versus fiction or manipulation. And I think the best way to do that is to have technical communicators involved from the very beginning. So hopefully we're going to have some scientists watching this.
When the link goes live, do you know how many scientists I'm going to send it to?
And here's the thing, and we're starting to see in academia where engineering departments are required to learn communications. I mean, it's becoming a requirement for them. So they're not just focused on the technical aspects of their scientific endeavor. They're taught that they need to learn a little bit about communication. Not that they're going to be tech comm people, but at least
the value of it.
So that they know how to work with the technical communicator, or the fact that when you're working with a technical communicator, they're there to help you be better.
Right. And I think that the fact that grant said the technical communicator will be part of the design. I mean, that is a game changer.
Yes.
And that I wasn't even aware that there'd been some discussion about, well, we'll just have her fix the document at the end. She's really nice at documents at the end. But there were two scientists who went, no, I think this sounds good. Why can't she? Needs to be part of the design of some of these experiments. And I would say probably this really helped create conditions for those nitrogen monitoring devices. They're called aerometers. They were attached above it's called an air shed. Where will it go? How high? That probably came in part because of having a technical communicator be part of the study design early on. And I said things like, well, while you guys are doing all that, I'm going to be going over to the Eastern Shore and I'm going to be visiting. I'm going to go to the 4-H events and I'm going to go to, and they kind of looked at me and it was like, okay, if you want to. And I went, oh, I do want to. But that was how you kind of figured out who your audience was. And also, like I said, the nice lady.
Well, it's interesting too, because you're bringing up I know we're out of time, but I really wanted to kind of bring this in. You have a unique background, a unique experience, and not everybody shares that. But here's the thing is, as technical communicators, you can go out and meet with people in the community, right? You
I
can go
trust-
and attend meetings, and you can get
Yes.
to know
And I
the
assure
people
you,
at
there
a
was,
different level,
there was
right?
no science needed to
No
go
science
to the Eastern
needed.
Shore for 18 months to go to visit all these things. It was
Right, and
really
on the
audience analysis. Yeah.
Right. And on
Yeah.
the flip side of that, if you're not a science person, it's okay because you're trained to ask questions and to seek answers, right? And that, I
Yeah.
think that's the main thing. So if you're a technical communicator and you're invited to participate in something that's, don't say, no, I don't know that science. That's okay. Like, be a
Yeah.
technical communicator. You're not there to be a scientist.
Yeah.
You're there to be a technical communicator, and they're great at spotting things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Mary
kind of
Beth,
like the
it's always-
silos.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're out of time. It's kind of like the silos, right? Those guys
Right.
are deep, deep, deep into their science. We are deep, deep, deep into the communication part of it. And those silos aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
They're only
No.
continuing to fracture.
Right.
Well, but the silos so if you're a scientist
Yeah.
specialized in a certain thing,
That's what you should
you
do.
need to be, right?
Yeah.
You need to be.
Absolutely.
You can't expect that
Absolutely.
silo to break.
Right.
You
Right.
gotta go,
Absolutely.
you gotta go dive in
You
there.
need somebody who's in the other silo to work with you.
Well,
you're-
and maybe it's a good thing to end on to say something like this. Technical communication, it's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing.
It's a discipline.
It's a thing.
It's a
It is.
boundary list.
It
So
is.
I prefer to think of it because silos, and I know that was a thing that a lot of people talked about before, and silos are important and they're needed and they're not going away. But I think technical communication is a boundless endeavor,
It is.
right? It is a boundless bridge building endeavor. And
Need
that's what
handshake.
technical communication is about.
A lot of
Scientists-
handshakes that TC
Yes.
can help with. A lot of handshakes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
So
yes.
Awesome.
Oh my gosh, it's
What a
so
great
fun to talk to you,
conversation.
Mary Beth. I wish you could talk longer. We've gone way over time.
Yeah.
But it has been so much fun. Who
So
knew
great.
chicken coop could be so interesting,
chickens in a chicken coop.
right?
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.